Might be 1 second.
Okay, God willing. Perek 17 in the book of Shmuel, Pasuk 39, Lamites. When we last left off, we had seen how David, by chance, or by providence, was sent to check on his brothers at the front lines of war against the Philistines. And lo and behold, as he arrives, he hears this gigantic man, Goliath, blaspheming God and taunting the Jews morning and evening. And he said, "What?" And unlike everyone else who was terrified, David was immediately moved to action, and he couldn't believe that this was happening. And he said he basically volunteered himself to face off with Goliath. After all, Goliath proposed a deal. Rather than having constant battling between the armies, let's just have a 1 versus 1, and whoever wins will become the master, and the others will be the servants. And so, when we last left off, Shaul had offered his armor, to David. The king Saul had offered his personal armor to David, and when he put it on David, the Midrash says it miraculously fit him. But sure enough, in verse 39, in chapter 17, it says, or is it verse 38, that, yes, 39, that David was not able to walk with the armor because he wasn't trained. He wasn't trained enough to be able to walk with armor, so he took off the armor and he went to go face Goliath, very seemingly unprepared physically. He didn't have strong weapons. He just had a sling with a couple of rocks and a staff. And we saw 2 interpretations about David not wearing the armor of Saul. There are 2 opposite interpretations, that's the truth. The first was, the simple meaning of the text is he physically couldn't do it. The armor was too much, is encumbering him too much. It was too heavy for him. He couldn't function that way because he was not trained in war. And therefore he took it off. It was a practical consideration. But the Targum Yonatan really says the opposite, that he didn't want to have the protection of the armor because he wanted to make it absolutely clear that Hashem was intervening here, and that it was not David who was winning the battle, but it was God who was defending the honor of Hashem and the honor of Bnei Israel. And therefore David said, if I have the armor, lo nisa, there will not be an awareness that this is a miracle, a nes. There will not be it will not be open that this is a miracle. And therefore I choose to fight without armor to make absolutely clear that this is from the hand of Hashem. Now, this is something beautiful that I heard once. I don't know the source for it, but I want to share it with you because this is the theme of David HaMelech. I'm going to share the screen for a minute to share a very basic and beautiful point. I even have a pen. Okay, here's the white screen here. The name of David HaMelech is Daled. Oh, hope I can color here. Can I draw? There it is. This is a Daled, the Hebrew letter Daled. Vav Daled, right? That's how you spell David. That's the name of David. Now, in Hebrew, there's a name for this letter is called Daled. The word Daled means lowly. Dal means lower, destitute. Vav is the upright letter, straight, more straight than the other letters, implying prominence and being uplifted. And then the final letter again is Daled, again lowly once again. And this is the pattern that we will constantly see in David HaMelech, which elevates him to such a high status and makes him the person who he is. He begins as a Dal. He begins with a lowly Daled. He is a lowly person, a humble shepherd who is an outcast in his own family. Nobody really knows about him. He's not invited to the party when the prophet comes over. Nobody knows him. And here he approached the camp, and his brother Eliab said, "What are you doing over here?" Humbled but from the outside and humbled from the inside. And then we're going to see David is consistently, he's uplifted. That's the Vav. He goes from this state of humility and being downtrodden to becoming uplifted and put upright. Hashem anoints him as the king. Saul invites him into the palace. He's about to defeat Goliath. And even after that tremendous promotion, he still remains the humble David, the humble Daled. who internally, he doesn't take any credit for himself. He attributes it completely to God. And this is the role of a king. The king is supposed to be not attracting attention to himself, but he's a vehicle to turn the eyes of the entire nation upwards towards the Kadosh Baruch Hu, towards God. And that's the role that David is going to serve ultimately, and so will his descendant, the Mashiach, who's going to bring all the attention to God. So here, throughout this chapter and throughout David's life, we're going to see him doing tremendous things and doing things that will get him tremendous honor, and yet he's going to stay humble and lowly, and lowly, the same humble David as he started, despite the uplift, the vav in the middle. That's a beautiful remez, a beautiful allusion, which will set the stage for this entire chapter. So David takes off. Yes, go ahead,
recall
Moshe.
learning, slightly related to that, I recall learning that Shaul HaMelech's armor was very special, and Shaul and David were not exactly the same size, and that miraculously the armor fit David, and David sensed that Shaul was very upset by this. Like, who's this guy who my armor miraculously changes to fit him? Is he challenging me? And David did not want to be in that position, and that's another reason that he gave the armor back.
Excellent. You took the words right out of my notes. This is the Midrash of Vayikra Rabbah. It shares exactly what Moshe just relayed. That a third interpretation given, it could actually pair with one of the other two that we said, as to why David took off the armor is, like the Midrash says, it miraculously fit him. And David sensed a bit of jealousy in Saul. Again, there's been seeds of jealousy that have been sprouting slowly. And David sensed that Saul couldn't bear seeing him with his own armor walking into battle, was something that Saul was not capable of doing. And therefore, to protect Saul's feelings and to prevent any tension between them, he took it off and really risked his own life. But he realized it was not a risk. Beautiful. Thank you. So we forge forth now. And David faces off with Goliath. This is where we picked up last time. So in verse number 42, we have the speech of Goliath taunting David. David, the Philistine Goliath looks out and he sees David Zehu, and he disdains him and he disgraces him. This is a young lad. He has that ruddy appearance, like it looks like a little kid who's just interested in war and battles. But he looks very gentle and incapable of battle. So immediately, on the physical appearance of David is something that leads Goliath to scorn him. And Vayomer Plishti al David, the Philistine says to David, what am I, a dog? Did you come to me with sticks? And we said here, Goliath was unknowingly alluding to his own origins, that on the night that he was conceived, his great grandmother Orpah had cohabited with even a dog, in addition to 100 men. That's that wild midrash that we discussed. And am I a dog? Did you come to me with sticks? And Goliath cursed David. And here's a significant thing. Goliath says, come to me. He first challenges David to come to him, approach me. I'll stand here and you approach me, and I'll feed your flesh to the birds and to the beasts of the field. Now, Rashi and Chazal, they say that this was a misspoken word by Goliath. To the behemat hasadeh, in Hebrew, the behemah refers to like domesticated farm animals, goats and cows, and those animals don't eat human flesh. Chayat hasadeh, lions and tigers would eat flesh, but domesticated farm animals would not. And this was a sign to David that God was with him, that he had confused Goliath to make a blunder like this, to refer to the beasts of the field who are going to eat his flesh, something that's impossible, a nonsensical phrase. This was another affirmation and validation to David that he realized that Hashem is with him. You recall there's a history that David was also aware of, that Hashem had saved him from the lions and the bears. When he was taking after his father's sheep, he had himself defeated the lions and the bears, and he had made a coat for himself from the sheep's fleece to remind himself of the miracle of Hashem. And David took that as a sign that Hashem intervened in that case, because he's preparing David for another victory that he's going to have. and it's this one. So David is picking up on all the clues, and now he's emboldened, and he replies to Shaul with his famous and powerful speech, 3 verses between 45 and 47, from Mem Hey to Mem Zayin. Vayomer David el Plishti, Ata ba'elai becher v'vachanit, you come to me with a sword and a spear, v'chidon, v'anuchi ba'elecha b'shem Hashem tzavot, but I come to you, but in the name of God. You come to me with weapons, but I come with something more powerful than any physical weapon. I come with Hashem, the master of the legions, Elohei Ma'archot Yisrael, the master of the legions of Israel, Asher Chirafte, which you have disdained. Hayom hazeh yasagercha Hashem be'adi. To this day Hashem will give you in my hands, and I will strike you, and I will take your head off of you, which was customary after the victor won. He would take off the head of the enemy and show his victory to everybody. And I will give your dead corpse, and Venatati, not your dead corpse, Peger Machane Plishtim, the entire Plishti army that's out here with you, the entire army will fall today, and they will all be fed to the birds, ulechayat ha'aretz. And he was more careful. He said, I'll feed you to the animals of the land, referring to those wild animals that actually eat human flesh. Ve'edu kol ha'aretz ki yesha Elohim le'Yisrael. And all of the land shall know that what? That the Jewish people have a God. Here's David clearly saying, I'm going to be victorious over you, but I'm completely aware that it's nothing to do with my power. And it's going to be so clear to everyone that it's Hashem who defeated you and the Plishti army. This is reminiscent, this mini speech that David gave, which is extremely bold. He's talking to an absolute giant who terrified the entire nation. This speech is reminiscent of Tehillim chapter 20. The famous pasuk, Ele barechev ve'ele basusim, v'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu nazkir. These come with chariots and these with horses, but we proclaim the name of Hashem our God. That we realize that in battle, it's not the physical strength or strategy which is going to help us, but who will be victorious is the one that Hashem chooses and the one that Hashem helps. And if you cleave to Hashem, then Hashem will make you win. And David is proclaiming this with his whole essence, and here he's saying it with his words, that he realizes it, and he gives all of the credit to God. So the Plishti is completely incensed. Oh, excuse me, there's another verse here. Ve'yidu kol hakal hazeh, and this entire nation will know, ki lo b'cherev uv'chanit yoshia Hashem, Hashem will not give salvation through sword and spear, ki l'Hashem ha'milchama, but rather God is the one who makes wars, and he's going to give you into our hands. Okay, that's David's speech. Curtains close. And now, you recall, Goliath had invited David to come to him. He said, here, come fight me. But he's so incensed, he's so ticked off, that now he starts going towards David, like, all right, I'm going to beat this little kid up. So, Vayaki kama plishti, and it was when the plishti arose. The expression ki kama plishti, or the Radak says, is he started hurrying towards David. He was so upset that he started rushing towards David, and he's approaching him. So quickly, David starts running towards him. He reaches his hand into his bag. He takes out one stone. You recall he only had 5 stones with him, and each one had a name on it, right? One was representing God, whose vengeance he's taking today. One was for Aaron, Cohen, whose grandsons were killed by Goliath. And the 3 were for the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who represented the nation which David was taking vengeance for. So he takes out one stone from his bag, Vayach et Plishti el mitzcho, and he slings it and strikes the Philistine in his forehead. The metzach is the forehead. Vatitba ha'even b'mitzcho, and the stone sinks into Goliath's forehead. Vaypol al panav arts, and Goliath falls forward onto the ground. So the Radak here asks, I don't understand. So yeah, first of all, David slings a stone, and that single stone takes down the giant, right? After all the haughty speeches and the 40 days of cursing, one single stone, probably the one that represented God, was flung at Goliath, and he came tumbling down. The Radak asks, the verses just described to us in great detail the armor of Goliath. He was completely covered from head to toe. How could it be that his forehead was exposed? The pasuk said that he was wearing a kova nechoshet. He had bronze armor on his head. So he gives 2 answers. He says, obviously Hashem is capable of anything, and this is part of the miracle. Either Hashem gave such power to that stone that it was able to penetrate the metal armor of Goliath and actually go into his head, and that was part of Hashem's intervention, or the little slit that was covering his eyes was temporarily open, because previously, a few moments earlier, Goliath had just said, I will feed you to the birds of the sky. And as he lifted his eyes to refer to the birds of the sky, that little slit flap open, and he had a small exposed area on his helmet, and it's that exposed area that the rock was able to pass through and penetrate into the skull of Goliath. Either way, Goliath comes tumbling down. Now, significantly, it says, Vayipol al panav arza. Goliath fell forward. Now, the physics, the Chazal tell us that really what should have happened is the impact of the rock should have sent him backwards, and he should have fallen onto his back. But instead, he fell forwards. And this was a miracle. This is Hashem intervening once again. In the language of Chazal, an angel came and pushed him forward. Hashem had intervened. Why? Why would he make Goliath fall forward? A seeming detail in his greater story. So it says there's 3 reasons. Number 1 is to save David a few steps. Why should the righteous David have to bother walking all the way around across this gigantic body to go cut off his head? I shouldn't have to make my righteous people do extra labor for naught. So for David's sake, he brought Goliath tumbling forward, and he saved him 2 body lengths of Goliath. The second reason he fell forward was because he had an image of Dagon, the Avodah Zarah of the Philistines, was that fish god, the man fish that they worshipped, was carved on the chest of Goliath. Either he had an actual figurine there, or maybe he had carved some tattoo, and he fell forward, so to speak, to take their idolatry, that god that he believed in, and he was cursing David in the name of that god, came also smashed against the ground. So he had to fall forward for that. Mm-hmm. And the third reason is because the mouth that cursed God should meet the dirt. Okay, so 3 reasons why I fell forward. There's one nuanced thing that I picked up on I thought was very interesting. I want to share it with you. The interpretation I just said, that the idol that he was wearing around his chest, or that was carved onto his heart, that idol should come and get smashed on the ground. So the Radak says it's like the verse in Vayikra, like the verse in Leviticus that says that this will happen. And I want to show you what verse he's talking about. I thought this was fascinating. Here, I'm going to share the screen. This is Parashat Bechukotai. And it says here in Pasuk Lamed, Perik, I think it's chapter 26 or 27, if not mistaken. 26, yeah. It says, I will demolish your edifices and cut down your sun idols. I will make your corpses fall upon the corpses of your idols. So the Radak says, Hashem was fulfilling this verse. V'natati et pigrechem al pigrei gilulechem. I'll put your corpses on top of the corpses of your idols. So here you have exactly this image, right? You have the corpse of Goliath on top of the corpse of his idol, so to speak, of Dagon. What's interesting to note here is, does anybody know the context of this verse? This is part of a series, a stream of curses. Moshe, what do you say? I see you unmuted.
People don't do what they're supposed to do.
What's that?
It's in the Tochacha if the Jewish people don't do what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. This is so interesting. These verses are directed at the Jews. If you shall leave my ways and you do not walk with God, then these are the things that will happen to you. If you start worshiping idols, the Jewish people, your corpses will fall upon the corpses of those idols that you worshipped. And the Radak here is fascinatingly saying that here Hashem fulfilled the verse, and I put your corpses on top of the corpses of your idol. I thought it was so interesting that the thing that was directed towards the Jews, the Radak is saying was fulfilled in Goliath. I don't know what he's doing here. Is it just like an interesting allusion he's making, but he doesn't really mean it? It doesn't sound like that from the way he speaks. And I wanted to share that with you just because I thought it was interesting. Oh, yeah, very good. Amelia, you wrote, is in the last parsha of Sefer Vayikra. Exactly. That's Parshat Bechukotai. Yes, when Hashem makes a new bris, a new covenant with us. Okay. That's where those verses are from. So Goliath falls forward. And in verses 50 and 51, Nun and Nun Aleph, this is seemingly is a repetition. It says, David overcomes the Philistine with a slingshot and a stone, and he strikes down the Philistine and kills him, and he had no sword in his hand. So we had just read the story, right? I just said that David slung the rock and Goliath came down. So why does the verse repeat it in 51? No, excuse me, just 50, yeah. Seemingly, this is just like the prophet who's writing down this book, like the narrator of the book is like stepping back to reflect on the tremendous miracle that just occurred. He's breaking the story, right? He's interrupting the story with just like, think about this for a minute. David just defeated Goliath with nothing but a slingshot and a stone, and didn't have a sword in his hand. It's like the author is stepping back to reflect on what just happened. It's fascinating, like a stylistic thing. Obviously, it's written prophetically with Ruach HaKodesh. Okay, David runs, and he takes a sword out of its sheath and slices off the head of Goliath. And upon seeing this, the Philistines start to panic, vayanusu, and they run away, they flee. They were so demoralized by the loss of their great, great, and powerful leader that they thought was invincible, that they start fleeing, and the Jewish people who had already been prepared for battle come and chase after them until the city of Gai, until Ekron, until Gat. So they penetrate into the actual Philistine cities. You recall the Gat and Ekron are some of the locations that we saw previously when the Philistines captured the Aron. And there was a very serious defeat of the Philistines. Okay. The Jewish people return after chasing after the armies, and they plunder their camps. They take the stuff they find in there. However, David is not interested in the plunder. And in verse 54, Vaikach David et Rosh HaPlishti, he takes the head of Goliath and he brings it to Yerushalayim, and his vessels, meaning the vessels of Goliath, Sam be'aholo, David put in his tent. So what does this verse mean? Yerushalayim at this point, Jerusalem was not a center of Israel. The Mishkan was in the city of Nov, which is north of Jerusalem, a little bit still in the territory of Benjamin, but it was north of Jerusalem. Why did he bring the head of Goliath to Yerushalayim? So interestingly, the Radak says, he quotes his father. I don't know who it is, but he quotes his father saying that Jerusalem here is actually a reference to Nov. The city where the Kohanim lived, because that's where the Mishkan was, is being referred to as Yerushalayim. It's also, geographically, it's just north of Jerusalem. I just think it's interesting. He's saying it's not Jerusalem proper. And then it says, that he put the vessels in his tent. David took the weapons of Goliath and put them in his tent. What that means is he wanted to make a remembrance of the miracle that Hashem had done for him. And this, again, you see consistently. When he defeated the lion and the bear to save that sheep, he took the wool of that sheep and he made a garment to remember the miracle that Hashem did for him. Now he defeats Goliath, and he takes those vessels, and to have a constant reminder of the salvation, he puts them in his tent. And just this is, again, one of the tools that David is using, a physical reminder to continue having that humility and reverence for God and appreciation that it all came from him, like remembering your humble beginnings. When I was just that little boy with a slingshot, I was able to defeat Goliath. He wanted to remember that constantly. There was one of the weapons, the actual sword of Goliath, was not in David's tent. That was actually placed in a Nov, in the center where the Mishkan was, so that the Jewish people should also have a reminder that was more public of the defeat of Goliath. Because the head can't stay there forever, right? The head's going to rot. So you take the sword as a reminder. Okay. Any questions so far? So good? Right. So verse number 55, Nun hey, v'chirot Shaul David yotzei likrat Plishti amar el Avner sar tzava, ben mize hanar Avner, vayomer Avner chei nafshecha melech imedati. This is a very strange verse. Shaul asks, upon seeing David approach Goliath and defeat him, he asks him, who is that boy? Shaul asks Avner, his attendant, Who's that boy? And Avner says, I don't know. This is bewildering. Shaul loved David and he invited him to be in his palace to be the musician. What do you mean, who's that boy? You know very well who that boy is. He's one of your attendants. So what's going on over here? There are three interpretations I'd like to share. One is very interesting. The Metzudat David, one of the commentaries here on the page, he says that Shaul was suffering from a ruach ra'ah, that's like a spiritual depression that Hashem sent upon him, and he simply forgot. He was so occupied with his sad feelings that he just forgot about the identity of David. Very interesting. The other interpretations, the Ralbag says that he knew who David was, but he didn't know about his lineage. And you recall the reward for slaying Goliath was that you get to marry the king's daughter. So Shaul said, okay, who's this guy that just took down or is about to take down Goliath? I'm going to have to give him my daughter. Let me make sure that he's from a good family. There can't be any, shady lineage issues. So he wanted to clarify the David lineage. And Avner at the time did not know who he was. The Gemara in Yevamos gives a related interpretation. Mr. Ben-Shir, what are you writing? He was seeing David in a different context, not in the palace, but in the field dressed as a shepherd. Interesting. So you're saying he didn't recognize him? Is that what you mean?
If you meet someone that you know very well in the store and you're used to seeing them in a classroom, it may take you a little while, or you may not even know who they are until they say something. So that's what I'm saying, out of context.
Excellent. The truth is I saw that interpretation from the Mahari Kara, another one of the great commentaries. I was not going to share it with you, but you shared it with us. He said, this can't be the David that I know from the palace, that little guy that plays the harp. Who's this person who's facing Shaul? Who's facing Goliath? He didn't recognize him because of the feat that he was involved in. That's another interpretation, very good. The Gemara in Yevamos says that what was happening here was Shaul recognized that this was another clue that David was heading for the throne. By hook or by crook, Hashem was pushing him towards that position. And he wanted to know, wait, is this actually possible? Is David a son of Yehuda? Is he from the tribe of Yehuda? And even if he's from the tribe of Yehuda, is he from the family of Peretz, who are destined to be the kings? The firstborn of Yehuda was Peretz, as opposed to Zarach, the second-born son, from Tamar. He wanted to know which family he's from. Is he from the royal family of Yehuda, or from the other family, which just means he'll be a leader? Meaning, is he a threat to my throne or not? That's what Shaul is trying to figure out as he's watching David step into this position. So this is the explanation for why Shaul asked for the identity of David. Either he actually didn't know who he was, for two of the reasons that we just shared, or alternatively, he wanted to know if he was fit for his daughter, or he really wanted to know, is this guy a threat to my throne? You asked, Shaul is from the tribe of Binyamin. Somebody wrote in the chat. I didn't see who. That's correct. The first king of Israel was from Binyamin. Shaul now had been informed that the throne he was going to lose the throne, and he assumed that it's going to go to an heir of Yehuda, which is where the royalty will stay for the rest of time. But you're right. Once the royalty went to Yehuda, it would be forbidden to take it away from them. That was one of the errors of the Chashmonaim, for a different story. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay, verse number 57. When David returned from striking the Philistine, so Avner, the army general, brought David before Saul, and David's holding the head of Goliath. And Shaul says to him, Ben miatan, whose son are you? Right, so he's looking into the lineage here. David ben Avdecha Yishai Beit Halachmi. Speaking very humbly, I'm the son of your servant Yishai from Beit Lechem. And when he finished speaking to Saul, the nefesh Yehonatan nikshura benefesh David. Yonatan was the son of Shaul. You remember, he's the one that initiated that huge victory against the Philistines. And he fell in love with David. He loved him. He loved him like himself. it says when he saw how David spoke to Saul, when they finished speaking, he was so moved that he loved David like his own self. The Mishnah in Avos quotes this as a prime example of love which is not dependent on any external things. This is a love which was really against the interest of David and against the interest of Yonatan. David was a threat to Yonatan because Yonatan was the rightful heir of the throne of Saul, and vice versa, right? Yonatan was a threat to David because they would be competing for the throne. Now, from this, you see that their love was a selfless love, that they really just appreciated one another. And the implication here is the way that David spoke is what inspired the love of Yonatan. He saw that he was so humble. When he asked for his identity, all he said is, "I'm the son of your servant Jesse." Nothing to do with, "I'm really strong. I just defeated your number one enemy. That wasn't that awesome. Look how I did." No self-praise, no taking credit whatsoever. It's very simple. "I'm the son of your son Jesse. That's who I am. Nothing else. Of your servant Jesse." Yeah. Interestingly, here I didn't see it inside, but the Art Scroll quotes the Al-Sheikh, one of the later commentaries on the Tanakh, and he picks up on the fact that Jonathan's name is spelled Yehonatan with an extra hey. I don't know if it's not reflected in the English translation that I have, the Art Scroll, but throughout the stories, now we're going to see his name continues shifting from Yehonatan with the extra hey, that letter of Hashem's name, to Yonatan without the hey. It's an added letter indicating some sort of upgrade. The Al-Sheikh points out, reportedly, that anytime Yonatan is doing something remarkable that's beyond the normal limits of a human, he's given this extra name, this extra letter, Yehonatan. Here, it was extremely selfless of him to love David, even though David was competing for the throne, or could have been competing for the throne. And this love that he had for him was so selfless that it deserved an extra hey. The letter of Hashem should join your name because you're behaving in such a way. Similarly, when he stood against the Plishtim and he did that brave thing in the name of God, he's referred to there as Yehonatan with that extra hey again, because again, he was going beyond what was normal for a person to do. This is the thesis of the Al-Sheikh, and you could test it out. If you read through the verses, you'll see where it switches back and forth and see, and maybe we could figure out our own approach. Okay. It says, so far Shaul is really impressed by David as well, and he takes him to be in his palace, and he does not let him go home. That's it, you're staying with me from now on. You just defeated Goliath, you're staying with me. And he puts him, and Jonathan and David also make a covenant. And in order to signify this covenant, Jonathan takes off his cloak, and he gives it to David, and he gives him his weapons, his sword and his bow, etc. And here we just talk about the success of David in verse number 5, chapter 18. Anything that David was sent to by Saul, Yaskil, he was extremely successful. And Saul appointed him to be the head of the army. Although he had no formal training, he had certainly proven himself that whatever he's doing is working. God is on his side. So he appointed him to be the head of the army. Vaitav beinei chol ha'am. Jonathan loved him, Saul loved him, and the entire nation loved him. V'gam beinei avdei Shaul, as well as the servants of Shaul, who naturally become jealous of somebody who's rising the ranks. Hey, who's this new guy who's suddenly, mixing in? We're the loved servants of Shaul. No, they didn't. They also loved David. You see that he was naturally a humble person that didn't rub his achievements into people's faces. Okay, but in the final moments here, we're going to read the turning point of the story, which is going to be a tragic one. It says in verse number 6, when they returned from striking down the Philistine, it says that David would travel to all the different cities with the head of Goliath to show them about the victory. Oh, a good clarification. David did not take the position of Goliath, but I guess he had some leadership position in the. David did not take the position of Avner, but he had some leadership position in the army. It doesn't say specifically what it says. He placed him over the people of the army. Yeah. But they were both functioning together. So David was like going on this tour, like the victory tour, showing everybody the salvation that Hashem had brought about. And the women came out lashir ve'amecholot, and they would dance likrat Shmuel HaMelech betupim b'simcha u'v'shalishim, with instruments, and they raised their voices. The ladies raised their voices, and they said, "Hika Shaul be'alafav v'David b'rivevotav," and they composed this poem. This might have been the refrain for a song that they made, or it was at least one thing that they said, and this was the end of the warm relationship. They said, Shaul has slain thousands, and David has slain tens of thousands. And Shaul became extremely disturbed by this, because they said David slew more than me. They gave David the 10,000s, me the thousands, and from that day he became jealous. What, is he going to take the kingdom from me as well? Shaul sensed the transition was occurring, and now there was a deep jealousy that was brought out of Shaul, because the women praised Saul more than they praised David. They praised David more than they praised Shaul. Excuse me. Interesting technical point here. It says that the women were singing. It is prohibited for a man to listen to the singing voice of a woman that's not his wife or his daughter. And so the Targum actually renders the word shir, song, as shabachu. They praised. Perhaps it doesn't mean that they were literally singing. They were just saying praises. Interesting. I'll leave that up to you. Okay. Have a wonderful night. I'm going to end it here because we have Mariv. We're in the middle of an exciting story. Yes. I'm sorry I missed some things in the chat. I don't know if it's anything pertinent.
It's okay.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
Thank you.